Hi Algebra students, welcome to video 6. In this video we're learning about the zero product property and we're learning how to solve quadratic equations by factoring. So first of all, the zero product property. There's a few things I'd like you to notice. These are just some basic facts. If you have a number times 0, it equals 0. If you have 0 times a number, it's 0. And if you have 0 times 0, yep, that's 0. But what if we have some variables? If you have x times y and that equals 0, what does that tell us about x and y? Well, the only way for two numbers to be multiplied and the result is 0, what has to be true is that one of these numbers needs to equal 0. So either x equals 0 or y equals 0, or they could both equal 0, but what we do know is that one of them needs to equal 0. So the reason we're talking about this is that's going to help us when we're solving by factoring, which is what we're learning today. So far this unit, we have been graphing parabolas, and if I ask you the question, what are the x-intercepts? Well, you would look at this graph and you'd go, here's one and here's one. And the first one has an x value of -2, and the second one has an x value of 4. There we go, -2 and 4. But what if I ask you to find those x-intercepts without graphing? Well, we're going to be learning 3 methods to do that. And those 3 methods are factoring, square roots, and the quadratic formula. So today we're learning our first method, which is factoring. So, solving quadratics by factoring. In many cases, we can find the solutions, or the roots, or the zeros, or the x-intercepts. Those 4 words all mean the same thing. So we're finding x-intercepts. We can find them by factoring rather than graphing. We're going to follow the steps below to find the solution. So here's an equation, a quadratic equation. And if I want to find the x-intercept, first we just need to think of the concept of x-intercepts real quick. If you have an x-intercept, let's say right there, whatever the x value is, let's say it's -2. What is the y value? Well, it's 0. No matter where your x-intercept is, your y value is always 0 because it lies right on the x-axis. So to find an x-intercept, we need y to equal 0. So that's why the first step says set the quadratic equation equal to 0. So we're just going to say, well, this equals 0. Then we're going to factor the left side. So you can kind of ignore the y after that. And then this is something we know how to factor. So to factor that, what we usually do is we'll make an x puzzle. We would put -10 on top, 3 on bottom, and the numbers that work for that are 5 and -2. All right, so that would mean our factored form is x plus 5 times x minus 2. And then this still equals 0 since that's what we set our equation equal to. And now, using the zero product property that we just learned, here we have 2 numbers, 1, 2, that are being multiplied together to equal 0. So what must that mean? Well, that means that either x plus 5 equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0. One of those numbers has to be 0 if they're multiplied together to get 0. So we set each factor equal to 0, and now we're just going to solve for x. So this is like a week 1 of algebra type equation. Subtract 5 from both sides, x equals -5. Or x equals 2. We don't need to do this. Write your answer using curly braces. On your online homework, the way you're going to be writing your answers is, since we have 2 answers here, you're just going to write -5 and then a comma 2, just kind of as a list with a comma in between. So that's really the method for factoring. So each problem, you factor it, you set it equal to 0, you factor it, and then you set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So let's do number 4 here. This is already set equal to 0, so we're ready to factor. So we need factors of -27 that add up to 6. Well, that would be 9 and -3. So our factored form is x plus 9 times x minus 3. And that equals 0. So now we take each factor and set each factor equal to 0 and solve. When you solve this first equation, you get -9. And when you solve the second equation, you get 3. There's our two solutions. So that means if we graphed this parabola, it would have x-intercepts of -9 and 3. Okay, the last one on this page. This is already set equal to 0, so we're ready to factor. So factors of 25 that add up to 10 are 5 and 5. So our factored form would be x plus 5 times x plus 5. If we set this equal to 0, each factor equal to 0, well, we get the same equation twice, which is fine. We get x equals -5 both times. But there's no reason to write that answer twice because it's the same thing. What this means in a graph is that you only have one x-intercept at -5, so that must be the vertex of your parabola. That's what that means graphically. Okay, moving on to our next example. A problem like number 9, this looks a little different for factoring. The method you'd want to use on a problem like this is greatest common factor, because there's no c value. So all we can do is factor an x out of both terms, and then we're left with x minus 8 equals 0. So we still solve this the same way. We set each factor equal to 0, so we do x equals 0, and we do x minus 8 equals 0. Okay, there's one solution already, and then this equation gives us a solution x equals 8. So you have two answers, two x-intercepts, 0 and 8. All right, a couple more problems to go. Number 13, just as a review, this one is a difference of squares. Remember, this is the type of problem where in order to factor this, we want to see if we can write it as something squared minus something squared. Well, x squared is x squared, and 8 squared is 64. And then our difference of squares formula says this factors as x plus 8 times x minus 8. Now we set each factor equal to 0, and we solve for x. This equation gives us x equals -8, and this equation gives us 8. And again, if you were typing this into your online homework, you would just write them with a comma in between. All right, this last problem says, well, what if these equations aren't already in standard form? So notice how none of these equations are already equal to 0. Well, it's actually not a huge deal. So we're going to do problem 20. We can't factor yet until this equals 0. So the way we make that happen is we just need to move all of this stuff over to the other side. So we're going to subtract 4x from both sides, and we're also going to subtract 1 from both sides, which gives us x squared minus 14x plus 48, and now these cancel and it equals 0. So this just has one extra first step. You have to move everything over to one side. Then we are ready to factor this. So we need factors of 48 that add up to -14. The numbers that work for that are -6 and -8. So then this factors as x minus 6 times x minus 8. We set each factor equal to 0, and we solve for x. So x equals 6 and x equals 8. That's it. You guys are ready to go and do your homework 6 on Delta Math. Good luck.